Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. I'm tired of saying I'm not a rabbi, but I'll say it again because it's important, because somebody just emailed me recently and addressed me as rabbi. And I said, no. I am an ordained spiritual director. I do provide spiritual counseling to people one-on-one and do workshops, mostly about aging to saging. So that's part of what I do. Plug. I've got a book out now. It's called I Thought He Was Dead. And it is a spiritual memoir. I've quite enjoyed the experience, I have to say. I never thought I'd be somebody who wrote a book. I come from the world of blah, 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 not where do you put a semicolon. But it was really a wonderful experience to do it. And I'm getting very sweet and wonderful feedback. So I'm really appreciative of that. If you want to know anything about anything I do, the simplest thing is to go to my website, ralphbenmurgy.ca. And Ben Murgy is a bit tricky for people to spell, but give it a whirl on Google. I'm sure you'll find it eventually. ralphbenmurgy.ca. And if you want to support this podcast, patreon.com/NTKR. All right. So that's all the shtick about that. My goodness, where do I begin? Oof. What a journey. The person I have on today is someone I've known for a very long time. A person who, by the way, when I lived in Winnipeg, came through town and derisively laughed as they said, "You live here?" They live there now for I don't know how many years, maybe 30. So the joke's on them, not me. That's the way this works. My guest today is comedian Lara Rae. And, you and I have not spoken in so long, and it's such a pleasure to see you. How are you?
Oh, it's so wonderful to see you as well. Yeah, I believe it's been a considerable amount of time. I've certainly been, I was aware of you and what you were doing and so on, but even then I kind of lost touch with that a little bit. But it was, we had a little kind of group chat thing the other night that one of your friends set up. And that was the first time I'd seen you in a while. And then, because often Facebook is a way to, reconnect with people you haven't seen in a long time, but we hadn't really done that much either. And so this is a wonderful chance to catch up.
Well, where do we begin?
I didn't know you were a rabbi, for instance.
Keep it up. Zoom well, Pell, Alice. Yes. All right. So where do you want to begin our story together?
Well, it's not a bad place to begin, is it? Sitting in your living room in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Because that's certainly connected our two stories, because you were one of the reasons I think that I jumped into Winnipeg. The decision to move to Winnipeg was primarily my ex's and was based on at the time just being fed up with Toronto. Mm-hmm. And it being quite expensive, and me also, really struggling at that time with alcohol. And so, I'm going into rehab and, alcohol, depression, the whole, I was just in a bad place. And so Winnipeg was kind of a start over. And so, the way it was put forward was that, on the other side of coming out of rehab, then I could join the family in Winnipeg if I chose, and if I chose to make that work. It was a conditional offer, let me put it that way. And one of the things, though, that was important to me, especially early on in recovery, is, could I make a go of it? I did think that to be occupied and valid and worthwhile, would be all things that I would need to feel that I was able to do in Winnipeg. And one of the ways that I was able to get that foot in the door was because you were there. Mm. And you had been at CBC. Yeah. And yourself and a few other people, through those connections, I was able to get my foot in the door at CBC. And and went from there to what has been, I think, a wonderful choice.
Yeah, the Winnipeg Comedy Festival and
Yeah.
all kinds of writing and
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, there is I used to joke about this early on, that I don't think that I would have co-founded the Toronto Comedy Festival, nor even been in a position where I would have had the credibility to do that.
right.
You know what I mean, Ralph? There's a certain amount of, not that I was a big fish, but I was a medium fish in a small pond.
You
When I
were
went
you
there,
you weren't a carp, but you were
I wasn't a carp.
a large koi.
So I had established a few credits,
Yeah,
radio credits, because I'd been doing some stuff at CFRB with our friend John Oakley there, and he
right.
had gone in there. So I had gone the radio route, as you had. I seemed to be chasing you in that way. You did comedy, then you were into radio. I did comedy, then I went into radio, and so on. I haven't. It's worked out really, really good for me.
So I don't want to dwell on things, but the drinking.
Yeah.
I remember you were, part of a comedy duo, singing comedy duo,
Yeah.
and I remember how much you were at my place in Winnipeg, and you drank a lot, and I thought, wow, that's a lot of drinking. What were you trying to drown in there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good drown, just oblivion, but drown the person that I was pretending to be, I suppose. I do think there was a certain amount of desultory kind of suicide to it, definitely, in a way, but if you're asking in a way, does my being trans and me struggling with alcohol, are they correlated? I would say, yeah. Number one would be that. Number two is probably being born in Glasgow. When you put those two things together, it's almost inevitable, right? But certainly, I would not be the first person who ended up identifying on the LGBTQ plus spectrum who struggled with drugs and alcohol as a way to cope.
But were you conscious of those things at the time, or was it just a reaction to just knowing this isn't right? I'm not me.
I knew at 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you know I was on Sauchiehall Hall Street in Glasgow in about 1969 with a friend of my mother, and she said, as older people did in those days, it was quite gendered and old fashioned, right? So it would all be, who you gonna marry, and this or that, and, who's your boyfriend then, And so I guess a friend of my mom's, just to be fun, and, what would have been a very young woman at the time says, who are you gonna marry then? And I said, I'm gonna marry my best friend, David O'Grady. I remember I said that, I had a big crush on this little boy. And she said, boys can't marry boys, and it's quite funny at the time. And then, what I said? She says, boys can't marry boys. And you know what I said? I would have been 7 years old, Ralph. I said, in San Francisco, they can't. I said at seven. Now, what's interesting about it historically is that would have been about 1968, 1969. And so that was a few years, at least half a decade before San Francisco became a gay mecca.
Yeah.
And even then, same-sex partnerships being legal would come much later. And so I was being a bit utopian or romantic, but it came from somewhere. And I think I have a pretty good memory of where it came from. That was kind of like the summer of love, 68, 69, right?
Haight-Ashbury.
Haight-Ashbury. Right. I saw on the news, Haight-Ashbury. And I remember very distinctly, as much as we can remember things, distinctly from our long ago memory. But I'm pretty sure I saw two men, one of them dressed in a cowboy outfit, kissing on the street. And that would have been in Haight-Ashbury. And
Right.
so the homosexuality would have been part of that, overall latitudinarian kind of attitude towards, life and morals that was coming up out of that time. It wasn't specifically gay,
Right.
but, you see what you want to see, right? And
So
I
you,
saw,
yeah,
saw it.
you knew from a very early age, but then I guess I mean, you ended up getting married as a man to a woman,
Yeah.
starting a family,
Mhm.
but drinking. So
Yeah.
the inner conflict must have been, well, what was it like?
Well, it's there's just a lot of deceit, right? There's a lot of lying. There's a lot of unhappiness, and it's interesting, because one of the things I think I was blessed with was I was quite precocious as a child. And I might even have this. Yeah. So interesting. I just happen to have this in front of me here. But this is Christine Jorgensen's
Yeah.
autobiography, and Christine Jorgensen is quite famous for being the first kind of famous, I would say, well, what used to be known as sex change, of
Right.
our generation, at least, from dropping bombs to blonde bombshell. Life magazine. Jorgensen had actually sought out and achieved, after a great fight. This was never easy and never has been for our community. But after a great fight, she was allowed to go to Europe and undergo sex reassignment surgery. And that in Denmark, and that famous picture, interestingly enough, of her, getting off the airplane and all that kind of stuff that came about as a result of the Life magazine story in 1950, was a latter day discovery of something that she had actually been living with and living into for about a year and a half.
Right.
But of course, it was quite transformative for her, the fame. And then it was quite transformative for society. And I mean, it was an interesting period because, on the one hand, it was seen as part of that kind of nuclear and modern deluxe kind of age where we can actualize anything through science and technology. And then at the same time, of course, it ran headlong into the continuation of 1950s kind of morality.
Right. Right.
And so there was a little bit of both,
So
but
you were trying to stay in your lane, as it were. You were
I was
trying.
trying to stay in my lane because I found out about Christine Jorgensen, and throughout the whole period, that I was closeted, I was fascinated and curious. But there were two things I knew. One was that this was what I was, that there was nothing I could do about it, that it wasn't malevolent or evil or immoral. I had no moral compunction about it. But the other thing I did know was you couldn't tell us all.
Yeah.
And that other people, for some reason, thought it was the worst thing ever. And to be a boy, so to speak, who knew she was a girl, or we wouldn't have said it that way in our generation, who thought she was a girl,
Right.
was not okay. It was actually, to me, and I think I was right about this, to assert that would be worse and more of a problem for everyone around you, especially yourself, than coming out and saying you were homosexual.
Oh yeah. No, in our generation, it was. I mean, we were in showbiz,
Yeah,
so there was a certain latitude. I mean, there was
yeah,
an ability to be gay in that world, but just gay,
but just gay.
but just gay, but at
And then
least that.
just gay, and then something that actually plays to some degree to this day, Ralph, leaving the next day. And sometimes when
Yeah.
I go to a small town, if I put on a show and I'm leaving the next day, they'll put up with whatever this is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's very entertaining as long as you don't plan to stick around.
Yeah. That's right.
Know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yes. And so, if I may use, that kind of Judith Butler kind of term, there was a certain performativity
Mhm.
that I could explore that I think probably saved me from suicide. I think being in show business saved me from suicide. I think if I had been streamed into a more conventional or blue collar world,
Yeah.
or we had stayed in Glasgow, I don't think I would have made it. I think the fact I was in show business and around the time you and I met, began to be introduced, for better or worse, to queer people, to queer society, was both a terror and a threat. And I think what prevented me until several decades later in coming out with my attraction towards men was AIDS.
Right.
Right? If it wasn't for AIDS, I think I probably would have come out in the 80s.
Right.
At least as attracted to men. And then we would have seen what would have gone from there.
So,
right?
Yeah. So there's got to be a part of this of trying to kill something.
Trying to both men, but I knew I wasn't gay.
You know that again?
I knew very early on that I was attracted to boys, right? My class. And I knew that was one thing. So that was one bad thing. And then I knew that I must be a girl. And that was another bad thing. But when I put them together, as in I'm a girl and I like boys, that didn't feel like a bad thing. That just felt like an impossible thing.
Right.
You see?
Yeah.
Because the way that and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, or a sexual way, but the way that I do being attracted to boys is different than how gay men would do it. Right. You know what I mean? It has the female kind of attraction. But
there must have been a part of you that was trying to kill a part of you.
Yeah.
And like I've got to kill this if I'm going to function. And if I don't, my life is going to be extremely hard.
Yeah, like kill it, tamp it down, right? Divert, distract. The other one is to, how would you describe it? What's the right word? Incorporate. That the first, I would say, life-affirming thing was when somebody approached me to write about gender in 2010. And I decided I was going to write a thing called One Man's Show, but I was going to write it for a female friend of mine, and I was going to have her play me. And I knew I was doing something with that.
Something's up.
Obviously, literally, I knew I was doing something with that. But at the same time, I knew that I was doing something.
Right.
I was affirming in reality something for the first time in my life. Right? In a positive way. I had whispered it to people that were close to me, people that I were intimate with, were familiar with my issues, if I may. But it was usually framed as a problem.
Yes, exactly. Right? Issues, right?
Rather than a journey.
Yeah.
Because there didn't appear to be enough momentum within me that somebody would really feel a desire to push or encourage me into doing something. Right. So it just kind of sits there. I mean, I told someone I was intimate with and very close to when I came out as trans, in 2015, I called her and I told her, and like most people, she was very supportive and kind and all this kind of stuff. But she said to me, it's amazing, because we were together for a long time, we were a couple and so on. And yet I didn't know. And I said, you didn't know, but for that time when we were sitting on the stoop and I talked to you about it for 2 hours. And then she said, I forgot all about that.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
And that's a response a couple of people have given me, because when things aren't alive in the world, no matter what they are, right? If they're just kind of secrets, they just kind of stay there because they have no impact, right? And so that I felt this had no impact on our relationship at the time, except that it had an impact, but like not a tangible one. And then once you don't do anything about it for years, nobody continues to think about it.
Right.
I wonder if Lara still hasn't transitioned.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
It's not an active thought in people's
No,
mind.
no, because you're not. You haven't.
But you're not. Yeah.
So they're just like, okay, maybe
Yeah,
he at the time was just going through a thing.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So what in your family itself, the one that you created,
Yeah.
what has been the journey for you and your ex and your kids? Like, what has been the journey?
Well, I mean, it was interesting because in some ways, because we had been divorced at least 3 years, right? And then because I came out after we got divorced and entered into a relationship with a guy, my sexual orientation was a matter of public record, right? And so we'd already kind of dealt with that, right? And then any residual kind of pain around, the dissolution of this long-term relationship was also hopefully in the process of healing and so on. And then I think with my daughter, she and I were very close, and we stayed close, and she seemed to be very accepting of it. But behind the scenes, she was struggling more than I knew. It wasn't until a friend of ours, much to my dislike and distaste at the time, until a friend of ours confronted me with this and kind of called me on it, I basically chose to ignore it. Right. In the kind of pink cloud of my self-actualization.
Right. It's just like, don't bring me down.
I decided that, this was good for me, and so it needed to be good for everybody.
Right.
No way did my daughter not accept that it wasn't good for me or any of those things. We raised her right.
Right.
But it's always different when it's people.
Yeah.
And so I would say maybe 2.5 years into my transition, we kind of had to go at that again. And now we have, I think, a much closer relationship, and one that is very similar to the one that we had before.
I mean, what you've done is such a road less traveled. And I've watched, I've seen things that you've posted, right? Where you're talking about even legitimacy, like official papers, a passport, all the things you've been through. Right?
Yeah, you have no idea how much of a struggle it is. Yeah, it's heartbreaking, some of it. And I came at it from a place of privilege and a place of people embracing and accepting it, which is the minority experience. To the nth degree.
Yeah.
Most people really struggle and suffer in their personal lives far more than I have, which is not to say I hadn't had my share of.
Yeah, I've seen some things, some tears,
Yeah, and some tears, but at the same time, I feel very, very blessed that I'm accepted, and at the same time, you have to do that balance, as Chris Rock says in kind of other contexts, like, I'm not going to give people a cookie, for like treating me like a queen, right? Which is sometimes where it is in Cisland.
Yeah.
It's like, well, nobody's killing you, and as is not a great benchmark, but it's a benchmark in many places. Luckily it's not a benchmark in my life. And, I'm very, very surprised. I've said this numerous times, but Winnipeg is a very accepting city in that way.
Yeah. I live in Hamilton now.
But if I don't give a fuck, as
But I live in Hamilton now, and every fifth time I'm saying the word Hamilton, I start to say Winnipeg, and I go, Hamilton, because
they have their similarities.
Yeah, they're both these wonderful sort of livable amount of people cities, right?
Mhm.
Where you there's an ability to connect and disconnect
Mhm.
that works. The stand-up community. Now, we started in the stand-up community, and it was a very macho culture,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there was a few women. I think almost all of, well, yeah, most of them were gay, and the men were straight, and
Mhm.
except for a very few. Uh,
Very.
yeah, Michael, Boncour would but he was in a theater troupe, so a troupe grotesque, so it wasn't the same thing. But the culture itself was very straight.
Very.
Um,
You know,
so
you
the, and you stayed working in that culture all the way through this, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, no, and I mean to see the transition in our environment, has been incredible.
Yeah.
As a scout, to go into, and I know it's not the same club, but to go into the Yuck Yucks, like
Mhm.
the main Yuck Yucks, which is
Yeah.
now, but was on Bay Street, when we were young, 1280 Bay. We would to go in there, as I did when I was at the comedy festival, and then two young trans women, will walk through the bar and go and sit at a table in the front, right? And then the server will come over and serve them, and nobody will turn their head. And maybe
Mhm.
sometime into the show, maybe one of them will say something, and the comic might turn, and they may get a little bump because they were talking. And so there's a little bit of heckling, or maybe they're just being part of the show, or maybe they're just sitting there and enjoying it. But one thing that's not happening is their transness being an issue for anybody in the room. And, I can't overstate how miraculous that is.
But what if somebody had shown up to go on who was trans? I don't remember anybody. And 35, 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, you would talk to people about transvestites,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
was a whole
Oh,
subculture
yeah,
over
yeah,
there, but
yeah.
never transitional, just
Yeah.
transvestite, right? But
Transvestite.
nobody in our circle was walking up on a stage like that, right?
No,
Is that changed? I mean, besides you, has that changed?
yeah. I mean, there's a ton of trans comics, right? There's Al Val, there's um, Trana Wintour. Trana Wintour. It's
Like that name.
yeah. There's Cindy um, from Edmonton. Uh, there's shows.
Right, right.
Put a show together of all trans, non-binary comics, and
Yeah,
maybe not everybody is on hormones and has had surgery,
right.
as one kind of transness, in the great trans um,
Spectrum.
spectrum there is now. But you're certainly going to have a whole bunch of different types of people. You're going to have non-binary people, trans men, trans women. You're going to have a gamut.
Oh yeah, and in the younger generation now, it is completely different. The gender fluidity is
Incredible.
the norm actually
It's
for so
incredible.
many kids. Um, how is it? How has all of this changed, or has it changed your comedy?
It's interesting. Some people have said that, I mean, you are, I guess, in general, for obvious reasons, you become a less angry person, in some ways, maybe a bit less cynical. You certainly become overnight marginalized in some way.
Mm,
And so you're dealing with intolerance and prejudice in a way that you never have. So in some ways that can make you more empathetic, you know. So I mean, certainly there's because I used to have the moniker the Dark Prince, of comedy, because
yeah.
I would go to the edgy, and it's still I still like dark jokes and I still like edgy jokes, but I've certainly moved away from, and I think a lot of comics have, from the idea of jokes that go after, specific groups of people. And, I understand the basic principle of punching up versus punching down.
Yeah.
And, I've backed off for a bunch of reasons. One, mostly that's unproductive, in terms of getting into these kind of Facebook arguments about what's appropriate and inappropriate for comics to talk about and so on. But certainly, a lot of what's going on with trans and trans jokes and stuff, is makes me a little bit like sort of like tired of stand up right now, for a bunch of good reasons. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I do it and I love doing it, and
I know it's interesting though, because I said to my wife a little while ago, I sure as hell wouldn't want to start being a comic right now, because there's so many things that you're not allowed to say anymore, that you don't know what you can say and not say. You don't know identity politics and all of that has become really a major part of what is a comic's role. And yet when we were doing it at the beginning, the idea was the court jester. I mean, really, the court jester just tweak the nose of power, and a lot of your material was wonderful that way. Just that ability to poke a hole in things.
Right? Yeah, I grew up with that, and this has been a struggle for me because, and then about, well, Sarah Schulman wrote a book called Conflict is Not Abuse. I don't know if you know this book.
No, I don't.
Fantastic book. And, the title kind of explains what it's about, that oftentimes people will get in conflict. And then because the other person is in conflict with you, you describe the action of the other person towards you as being abusive.
Right.
And really, in some cases, it mostly can be identified as a conflict. And then usually it's an ideological conflict. In other words, it's about things rather than it's about ideas rather than things, and things we can't change or whatever. Right. And so, I mean, that's part of what's going on right now is there's a lot of that going on. But she basically talks about something called overstating harm. Right. And so when somebody makes you feel a certain way or says a certain thing about you, so somebody says something transphobic to me, right? How I respond to that, obviously it's hurtful, it's terrible, and it doesn't make you feel very good, right? But when I decide to say, it ruined my day, which I've certainly said, it ruined my day. Two things are going on. If we want to pivot a little bit into the spiritual part of this, two things are going on, right? One is I'm making a declaration, which is probably now going to be self-fulfilling. You've ruined my day. I've decided, right?
I'm giving this one away. You have ruined my day.
One away, And so then, then you basically have to decide how you're going to handle these things, and a lot of the last year of my life, I would say, has been in that spiritual realm, which is how am I going to decide to deal with things that don't seem to be going away? Because one of the things that bothers me terribly is being misgendered, right? And I would say there's probably one thing that I could do fundamentally, which would make being misgendered disappear by about 99%, which is if I could change and fix my voice to a certain pitch and leave it there. In other words, if I sounded or was read unambiguously as a woman.
Right.
And there are actually, within speech pathology, there are determinants, some of them have to do with dB and pitch levels, and then some of them have to do with reflection and intonation. And then there are certain characteristics at certain points that were attributed. But basically, at the end of the day, the test has been the same for the last 40 or so years, is you're going to listen to someone on the telephone and you're going to be asked what gender that person is. And if 10 out of 10 say the person talking is female, you have passed the test. Right? And I wouldn't pass that test right now. Right. And there are things I could do that I've chosen not to, right? And so in a way, that part's on me, right? And these are kind of hard pills to swallow. But at some point, there are just you run into walls, right? And you've created a clear path for yourself, for the rest of your life in front of you, in terms of some of these things that you're self-actualizing. But at the same time, other things are going to come into that path that you have no control over, right? And those are going to be there, right? And in a way, it's like quitting drinking. It's like sober me can handle things a lot better than drunk me. And female me can handle things way better than pretending to be male me, right? And that's my benchmark when I get up in the morning, right? Mm-hmm. And then from there, I'm building on that kind of foundation. So there has been a single day that I have regretted this decision, I'll put it that way.
Right. So becoming true to yourself allows you a certain equanimity, a certain peace that you weren't going to get until you did it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had to be right. And I'll use language that's a bit more sort of precise than I would normally use, which is it had to be right with God, or I wasn't going to do it. In other words, I had to feel that this was 100% a spiritually beneficial decision. Was this going to improve my spiritual way of being, or was it going to diminish it? Was it a healthy choice in that?
Right, and in the spiritual pursuit, authenticity is everything.
Yeah.
Right.
And that included, although I had very little concern about it from a theological or dogmatic point of view, whether or not that certain sacred texts, I come from a Christian kind of background, were they on side with this, or were they against it? And if I was going to continue to be in or talk about or participate in that kind of general Christian realm, mostly I go to Quaker meetings. Did I feel okay with that? Could I defend that? And I very quickly and easily could, And like I said, I'm not that interested in it, but at the same time, I know what's thrown back at us, right? And one of the main things that's thrown back, obviously, is from Leviticus, right?
Right.
But I'm not a man dressing up like a woman. I'm a woman, right?
Right.
And so
do you never ask the question of God of why did you make me go through all this? Like, why didn't I just start this way? Why did I have to claw my way through my life to get to the point of being myself like this?
Because I don't look at myself as one of the children of God. I don't look at myself as the child of God. I don't think that God is that particularly interested in that part of it. There are 1% of people, and it seems to be consistent throughout millennia, 1%, 2% are a little bit different when it comes to how they pair up or they behave according to kind of norms around raising families and being in coupling and being in units and mating and so on, right? There seems to be some diversity there throughout nature, which is part of the general evolutionary trend.
Right.
And I am a little bit interested in the science of it. And one of the things that seems to be interesting about it from a science standpoint is this idea of neuroatypicality, that this seems to be a variation that begins in the brain. right? In other words, my chromosomes, my hormone levels, my thyroid, my endocrine system, the organs themselves, everything normal and intact, right? The one place, and this would only be determined post-mortem, is that if you slice into the brain, there may be a tiny area of the brain that seems to be involved in the self-consciousness of gender, right? That is slightly different in me. And the way that is slightly different, and that part of the brain that is different, also seems to be the part of the brain that is sometimes different when people are described as being neuroatypical or on the spectrum.
Right. Neurodiversity.
Couldn't count on 15 hands, Ralph, how many trans friends of mine I know who are unambiguously autistic.
Wow.
Or the number of people, and I know that there will be many who know me amongst your listeners and certainly within my own family and stuff. It doesn't get a lot of airplay, but there are people close to me who I trust who put me into that category as well.
Right.
And I mean, nobody's gonna, and my parents especially are gonna argue around the idea that I was a weird kid, right? So whatever weird means and whatever weirdness is, this weirdness seems to be part of a great pattern of things as to how we all are. And what we're learning very quickly, and I see this in my incredible university classes I teach, where most of the students are non-binary, and most of the students, I couldn't tell you what gender they were when they were born if you paid me. Like, I literally don't know. And I had to stop caring, right? Because it's an old person thing to do. It's like, I don't care, but I need to know. Why do you need to know? I don't know. That kind of thing, right? But that's just the way they are. And it appears to me to be a really as much of a cultural revolution as the 1960s.
Yeah.
Kind of, it's a moving towards a loosening of the chains of conformity around sex roles, if you wish.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
This seems to be the Rubicon we're crossing right now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever going to go back.
So, I mean, you want to have your art and your expression. Is there a part of you that just thinks, I really don't need to be the poster girl for everybody for this? I don't need to, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because the other thing that it brings up is that doing this is an act of creation, right? I mean, literally, obviously, but it also is spiritually, but it also is artistically. And I wasn't a big fan of the movie The Danish Girl for a bunch of reasons, but one of the things I found fascinating about the film and the novel and the real story of Lily Alba, the woman it was based on, was that she was an artist, right? A visual artist, and a well-regarded one, as was her partner. And that on the other side of transitioning for that brief year that she lived after her second surgery, she worked in the glove department, I believe, of like a department store, right, with all the other ladies, right. And she comes in the morning and she's so happy, right? And I saw the film early into transition. And I knew that feeling. And still to this day, and I think because primarily, and we're still in the midst of COVID, so this may change, but right now, and since I left the comedy festival, I've been working in social services, and right now I'm working in a place where I help run the dinner program, and we feed people with food insecurity every day. And so a lot of my job is cooking, ordering things, managing a floor. It's like a real job, and it's a hard job. And, no offense, because it's a wonderful company, but they don't pay me very well by show business standards.
Right.
And these are all things that it takes me a while to get used to. This going in every day and shit.
Yeah. Hey, listen, when I moved to Winnipeg, it was the first straight job I'd ever had.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I phoned my wife, my first wife.
Yeah.
I phoned her at the time, and I said,
Yeah.
Do I stay here till 5? Like,
No,
how does this work? He said, no,
Yeah.
you got to stay till 5. Like,
no, it's
but
crazy.
I finished my work. He's like, no, stay till 5. I know.
Crazy. I know. And I mean, I was lucky, very lucky. And again, back, thanks to you, that I did get in at the CBC in the 90s, and a lot of the 90s before the comedy festival. I was kind of in there every day or 3-4 days a week, doing very fun and very creative work, but very much like a job.
Yeah.
And I would see very quickly, and I still see to this day, young people from the stand-up world who either come in to volunteer helping me in social services, or they're involved in one of the other projects I'm involved in that's more of a production. And you can tell very quickly who hasn't worked 2 or 3 days starting at 9 o'clock, putting in consistent 4 or 5 hours for decades or ever.
Forever, yeah.
Because they're looking a little rough after a couple of days.
That's right. You want me to come back tomorrow? What are you, nuts?
Yeah. But I would have to say that I think part of my, as you call it before, my equilibrium and my sense of well-being and stuff is the general sense of contentment that I start the day with that I never started my day with before.
How lovely.
Right. And that for the first time in my life, because, and we talk about identity, and I'm with you in some ways that, since identity politics rose with the collapse of the international left, right, which was really based along class lines. And then once that collapsed, my good friend Paul Krasner, who passed away last year, who was one of the yippies and someone I was very blessed to know in the last years of his life. Krasner said, "We've gone from we shall overcome to we shall overlap." That was his identity politics, right? And in a way, it's true, right?
Yeah.
We shall overlap, right?
I love that.
But the one thing about identity that I think is very important to me is I identified so much for 19 years. A lot of my self-esteem came from being, hey, she's that woman that runs the comedy festival, right?
Yeah.
I'd be nice to her. Don't charge her. She runs the comedy festival.
Yeah.
Whatever little ego thing, right? I'm not just someone with a job. I'm someone who runs the whatever.
Yeah.
Better or worse, that was an important part of who I was. And then before that, I was, that's Al from Al and George, that's, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So much external validation, right? So much external validation.
Absolutely.
And for the first time, it's like if all that went away, and when I left the comedy festival and I didn't do stand-up for a while, it had all gone away. I mean, I hadn't lost it in the sense that no one was preventing me from, continuing.
Yeah. You just decided.
And you take a break, right? Whatever.
Hey, I walked away, for quite a while. That's why the book's called "I Thought He Was Dead," because when people did see me again, to be, I thought that guy was dead.
You take a break, right? And then you reflect and you do all these kind of things. So now I always say, I'm back at it, I'm back in it, but it's nice. And you must know this feeling too. It's nice. I have a job. When I get a call and they say, you want to fly to such and such and do a debaters, I'm like, do I want to take a couple of days off work? Fly, stay in a nice hotel, walk out on stage, have people recognize me and applaud, have people laugh. Do I want that? And then, get a check afterwards. That's, 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't want that. I'm fine.
I think I do, and so, but it becomes a nice.
Yeah. Well, whatever you don't have to do, it becomes, the cage we built one bar at a time, right? Until we're in it and we can't get out, right? But you've
You're
taken such
absolutely right.
control of your own destiny. I mean, when I listened to you, you walked an edge for a long time with a lot of internal struggle, and then you made the decisions you knew you had to make, and I'm sure for other people they can't even make the decision. It just breaks them. But you did it. You did it, and you are it, and it's.
But I mean, it
crazy.
Was through the support, and concern of so many, including my ex,
Mm.
And I mean, part of being that kind of husk inside and not caring is, that it's often existential that we have something that we can move towards.
Yeah.
And I had a child, right? That's so important, right? That I had a child. And then, and then we did something, and it was such a conscious decision, one of the most conscious decisions that I made in my life was in conjunction with Lucille, which was we were going to raise the child once, because we split up because I was drinking so much. Then we decided we were going to reconcile and we were going to get together. And then once we got together, the decision was that we were going to raise this child together to adulthood, because it felt like staying together was the best thing for the kid. Right? Because as Jeff Rothpan said, kids love screaming and fighting. We stayed together for the kids, because kids love screaming and fighting. And so in hindsight, and as my daughter says, both insightfully and heartbreakingly, you guys should have broken up when I was 7, 8, whatever. That was her subjective sense of the kind of the stress of growing up in the household of two unhappy people. And I feel terrible about that, obviously.
It never feels good.
I made it, if we'd split up. So selfishly, I'm glad we didn't split up. My ex-wife kept me alive for so many years.
Yeah.
I owe her my life in so many different ways.
Isn't that lovely?
And to this day, she remains, a tremendous pillar of support for both myself and for my daughter. An incredible person. I was very lucky.
All right, listen, I'm gonna go. I love talking to you. It's been so long. You and I have not sat down and had a conversation together in ages. Lara Rae.
Thank you. When do we get to talk about you?
Oh, you have to start a podcast.
Is this a part one? I hope this is a part one.
Yes, we shall. We shall come back together again. And I just really appreciate who you are. I always have, through every iteration of who you've been. I
want to talk about there's so many good things we can talk about. So I hope you have me back.
Oh, I will. Absolutely. And
the first time I saw the word rabbi was in the New Testament. Are you frozen?
No.
Oh, yeah, I thought you were frozen.
I'm just sitting there going, yeah, so you saw it in the New Testament.
I saw it in the New Testament. I think it's in the Revised Standard Edition, where at some point it says somebody addresses Jesus. In Hebrew,
right.
By rabbi, right? It actually says in parentheses, which means teacher.
Yeah.
And it was the first indication. And I was quite young when I observed it, of moving Jesus away from being a Jew.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, to be fair, rabbi does mean teacher, but
it does. But it was put in there to clarify.
Yeah.
They were calling Jesus rabbi because it's their word for teacher, not because one of the ministers.
So I'm in.
They didn't want you to picture a rabbi.
Absolutely. I'll tell you one last story. So when they first built the Eaton Center, I was walking through it with my best friend Mike, and we were walking through the Eaton Center, and there's this little old couple walking in front of us, and they're looking up, and the guy's looking at the Canada Geese thing that Michael Snow had done, and he's looking at it. He turns to his wife and he just goes, "Well, it's not Glasgow, then, is it?" And they just kind of shake their heads like, "Where the hell are we?"
That's
And out
probably
they
my
go.
yeah.
Got it perfect.
Remember how upset he got, Michael Snow, when they put the fucking ribbons on the necks of the
Yeah,
geese?
yeah. All right, my friend.
George, my darling.
I'll see you soon. You take care of yourself. Lara Rae is my guest on Not That Kind of Rabbi.
Nice to see you again anytime.
Anytime. And folks, if you want, go to ralphbenmergy.ca and you'll find anything you need to find: spiritual counseling, my book, workshops, and all kinds of stuff. And if you want to subscribe, please do. Apparently that seems to matter. And patreon.com/NTKR is where you want to go. So take care, my friend. Love
I'm going to
you.
read the book, and when I come back,
Yes.
we'll talk about your book.
We'll talk about there. You'll finally get to me. See you later.
I want to. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.